This program is brought to you by Emory University.
I am Sharona Hoffman. I am ordinarily a professor of law and bioethics at Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and also the co-director of the Law Medicine Center there. I'm here on sabbatical. My friend and colleague Ani Satz, who teaches health law here at Emory, invited me to spend my sabbatical here as a visiting scholar. And when Martha Feynman heard I was coming, she also invited me to be part of the Vulnerability in the Human Condition initiative. So I'm a visiting scholar in that program as well, and I'm delighted to have that opportunity. All right, well, I graduated from law school a very long time ago, so I don't know how brief I can make it, but my first job after law school was a judicial clerkship for a district court judge in Michigan, Judge Douglas W. Hillman of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And that was really a fabulous job. I highly recommend federal clerkships to any student who can get them. I learned a whole lot. Then I went to work for a large law firm in Los Angeles called O'Melveny & Myers. I was a litigation associate there. And I spent much of my time working on the Exxon Valdez oil spill case, which I guess dates me. But I did research for that case. I also spent a lot of time on discovery, as is often done in law firms. And that was a good experience. I learned a lot about managing large cases, especially with respect to discovery. I tried to live as cheaply as I could so I could finish paying off my student loans quickly. And once I did that, I decided I wanted a public interest job. In the meantime, I had been transferred to Houston, Texas by the law firm because Exxon Shipping Company was headquartered in Houston. And so I actually took a job as a senior trial attorney for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in Houston. And I loved that job. I had my own cases, I had a lot of court appearances, and I felt really good about the work. We were a federal agency with a mission. We were there to help vulnerable populations, minorities, women, people with disabilities who were facing barriers in the workplace or who couldn't get jobs or couldn't keep jobs. And so I held that job for 6 years. At the same time, I had written some articles. I was teaching as an adjunct at South Texas College of Law, and I started wanting to have an academic job. I thought that would be a good fit for me as a full-time job. And so I went back to school and I got an LL.M. in health law. At the time, the University of Houston had the #1 ranked health law program in the country, so that was lucky for me. And after I finished the LL.M. program, I was able to get the job at Case Western, and I've been there ever since. I've been there 15 years. And this is actually my second sabbatical in Atlanta. I was here in 2007 working with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and at that time I worked with the health law, public health law program on issues related to emergency preparedness. And in fact, I did a lot of work on what you have to take into account to prepare vulnerable populations for an emergency, because you have to keep in mind that not everyone is mobile, not everyone can go to shelters, not everyone can go to distribution points, not everyone can read normal print or hear or see. And so you have to keep in mind the needs of those populations. This time I'm spending part of my time here at Emory and part of my time back at the CDC. This time I'm working with their Center for Surveillance, Epidemiology, and Laboratory Services. So I'm running around and having a very good time. So much of the work that I've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years deals with the intersection of law and health information technology. And in fact, I've written a number of articles with my husband, who is a computer science professor, so he brings in the technical expertise so that I know what I'm talking about. And we are undergoing in this country a really important transition in the medical field. We are leaving behind paper medical records and adopting electronic health record systems. And that raises very interesting and important questions. So once you computerize records, what privacy concerns do you have? Hacking and stolen laptops and all sorts of things. What security measures do you have to implement to make sure that privacy is safeguarded? To what extent do we need to regulate this new technology? Electronic health record systems are not as thoroughly regulated as drugs and devices, so should we leave quality control up to the market, or should we have the very intensive oversight that we have for food and drugs and devices? What malpractice risks arise when doctors all of a sudden start using the computer at the bedside in the examination room and do not interact with patients quite the same way, do not just take notes and dictate notes? And I also have done some work on the issues of using electronic health records not only for treatment but also for what's called secondary uses. So there's a lot of potential to use computerized records for research, for public health initiatives, for surveillance of drugs and devices once they are marketed, and for a lot of other purposes. So what are the legal and ethical implications of doing that? And so while I'm here, I am writing a chapter on medical privacy and security that will be published in a book. I am working on a chapter about data quality issues. So when you have computerized records, you might think, oh, that is of much higher quality than paper records, but you also have to worry about mistakes. There can be data input errors, typos. There can be doctors who are working quickly and choose the wrong menu items from drop-down menus or check the wrong boxes. You can have fragmented records because patients actually go to a lot of different doctors and they have systems that are not interoperable, so you have a piece of the record here, a piece of the record there. So what data quality problems arise, both when you are treating patients and then also when you are using those records to do research or public health work? And I'm also undertaking a project that is taking me in a completely new direction that also has to do with vulnerable populations, this time aging. So I am involved in a lot of work caring for elderly relatives. In fact, my mother just died last year. And as I've been doing that work, I've been starting to think that people should sort of prepare for aging. We shouldn't leave it just for times of crisis. And so I'm looking into what you might do, or at least think deeply about, in middle age in order to prepare for older age. So what legal documents do you need? Advance directives, wills, living wills. What do you have to do in terms of savings? What do you have to do in terms of adjusting your approach to medical care? So maybe instead of just running to this specialist and that specialist as you get more medical problems and more complicated medical problems, you really need to worry about coordinated care, about making sure that someone is looking at all your medicines and all of your treatments and making sure it's coordinated. what residential settings are most appropriate. Do you really want to just age in the home that you've had for 50 years, or do you have to worry about being in a community that will create opportunities for social interaction, intellectual stimulation, a safe environment that is a better fit for mobility and other limitations? So there are a lot of issues I'm looking at and hoping that a book comes out of it. So I'm trying to be very productive and really enjoying doing diverse and interesting work. Oh yes, of course, it wouldn't be fun otherwise. So writing about health information technology and the law is very challenging because technology changes. So what you write about how electronic health record systems work today may not be true by the time your article is published, in fact. So you have to make sure that you're really keeping up with the technology and understanding how the technology works as it evolves. Also, the government is starting to regulate electronic health record systems, and it's rolling out regulations that are called meaningful use regulations, having to do with how these systems should be used in 3 phases. So 1 phase, 2nd phase, a 3rd phase. So again, there's a lot of law and regulation to keep up with, and you have to make sure that you are writing about the correct phase of the regulations. And then writing a book manuscript, first of all, requires me to write a little bit differently, to think a little bit differently, because I'm hoping that if it's published, it will reach a more popular audience, so it can't sound completely academic. And also, it turns out it's challenging to find a publisher for a book that is not thoroughly academic. There's a lot of self-publishing going on. Publishers are getting more and more picky about what they choose to take on as projects, so I think it will be somewhat challenging to find a home for this if it turns out into a book. I've, for many, many years, been interested in vulnerable populations. As I said, I worked at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and that work was all about vulnerable populations, helping people who face challenges in the workplace because of their race or color or religion or national origin or disability or sex, etc. So really I spent 6 years dedicated to that work. And then I continued on with that when I became an academic. So I've written about disability issues, I've written about clinical research issues, and clinical research obviously affects people who are ill or who have disabilities. And even in the work about health information technology, a lot of the issues are particularly relevant to disabled people or vulnerable populations. You have privacy concerns. Obviously, the people who obtain health services the most are people who are ill or have physical or mental limitations. So it's really been a theme that has carried out throughout my work. Sure. So I am working, as I said, with the Center for Surveillance, Epidemiology, and Laboratory Services. And that part of the CDC is doing a lot of work with so-called big data, which is collections, very large collections of data from electronic health records, from laboratory reports, from environmental samples. So big data refers to large collections of information that are also very complicated. And so this fits well with my work that I've done on health information technology. They're worried about privacy issues. They're worried about data quality. They're worried about data security. And so I'm consulting with them about how to make sure that, first of all, you maximize the potential for this big data use, but also do it responsibly. And they're going to be using it for all sorts of public health initiatives to track disease outbreaks, to track chronic diseases, to respond to public health emergencies, and to try to formulate policy recommendations for all sorts of problems such as obesity and motor vehicle injuries and HIV and so on. So I'm doing a lot of talks for them, doing a lot of talks at Emory also, and some of the writing that I'm doing I think will be helpful to them. And I'm also helping to train their fellows. They have a whole bunch of fellowships, so I'll be working with their fellows to make sure they understand these issues.